Hello, hi. It's Michael Lerner, and I want to congratulate Pacifica Historical Society, Channel 26, for their new series, Footprints of Pacifica. I'm speechless. You're going to love it.
Hi there, Frank Winston here from the Pacifica Historical Society and our show, Footprints of Pacifica. This is where we hope to explore the lure and the lore of this city, why people come here, what they can do here, what makes it so famous and what's so historic about it. And we do that through the history of the association, the Historical Society, and through many other things available, including, may I show you this book? Because when I was new to Pacifica, I first read about the history, and this was published by the Pacifica Historical Society, actually the Arcadia Press, but authored by Bill Drake and Jerry Crow and Chris Hunter and Paul Azevedo. And there's really called the images because there are so many photographs that go back before the city. As we know, the city was founded in 1957. But the photographs go back to the 1890s and the 1900s, and many of our historical landmarks began then. The Ocean Shore Railroad began then. And now, the tape.
Keep going.
Okay, and now a tape that shows you more of the background and beautiful historic sites. When the only known inhabitation was the Ohlone Indians, and by their tribe maybe 6 or 7 or 8 families.
And these people had a headman. Sometimes they had a council of elders, but they didn't quite have a tribal structure. So the word to describe their social organization is tribelet. And that is the way we should refer to them, or as bands. Either one will fit, because they do seem to have had a band structure at that time the Spanish arrived.
And then in about 1769, Gaspar de Portola, who was then the governor of Alta California and Baja California, that time Spain owned the whole territory, and he was governor of both, and he was assigned to an expedition. And they got to the point here in what is now Pacifica and sent part of the party up to this area we know as Sweeney Ridge. And they found a body of water there that was not the Pacific Ocean, but lo and behold, it was not Monterey Bay. It was something new and bigger and probably better. They discovered San Francisco Bay. While they were here, they became ranchers. They brought some more settlers, and also, missionaries came with another expedition and moved along the route to build more missions, in particularly stopping in San Francisco for the celebrated Mission Dolores. And there was indeed a connection between Mission Dolores, and has always been, San Francisco and Pacifica, because the agriculture here, from the climate and the soil, was just great. Whereas San Francisco didn't offer the same, and so the missionaries in San Francisco sent some of their people here to farm the land, and the goods would then come back by, in those cases, mules and horses to feed the people in the mission in San Francisco. And so the Spaniards, having settled in, and give you some perspective, they had communities here in San Mateo, it is now San Mateo County. And of course, you recall 1848, the gold rush and the large bodies of people coming in through the San Francisco Bay. A few settled in San Francisco as merchants, but most of them went on to explore to find that pot of gold. Meanwhile, in the state, after 1848 came the revolution, or the achievement of statehood for California. California would now be part of the United States. But San Francisco and San Mateo County were still joined. But in the early 1900s, We suffered from the earthquake in San Francisco, and a few folk were driven by that to the city of Pacifica. Most notable, of course, would be William Henry McCloskey, and that's because he wanted a safe place for his family, and he found it here in Pacifica on one of our hills, and he built his now known as a castle, then was called Windermere, and he built that for his family to live in. There weren't very many families here, and there wasn't much transportation here. But he was involved with several other wealthy people and an attorney who, in fact, he was the attorney for what then became the Ocean Shore Investment Company. And that was the guise to make this place more popular and to make the investors more wealthy. And their plan was to originate a rail from San Francisco downtown, passed through this area of Pacifica, further south to Half Moon Bay, and even further beyond that to Santa Cruz. And they started in 1905. And in doing that, they reached at least a part of the coastline, which is what the attraction was to build, building tunnels and building tracks through the mountains, but mostly on the coastline. And at the same time, some of their people were building from Santa Cruz to Half Moon Bay. What a great idea. Even better was buy the land first and then speculate, build some resorts, some housing, and some attractions to our beaches so that people would come out here for the day, for the summer, or for a long time. Well, that's a terrific idea. And some people did, in fact, commute on occasion or on the weekends through the Pacifica area and through the coastside.
I rode on it. I remember one particular time with my mom and dad, and that was a precarious trip, right alongside the ocean, you know. You could just get devastated by just looking down because it was right on the cliff there.
For our first stop would be at the Thornton Station, or subsequent stations along the way, picking up passengers and produce, and the memorable occasion that I am referring to was when we stopped at that lagoon. The Laguna Salada was named after a lagoon, an arm of the sea that came in and covered a good part of what is now the golf course. But down to the lagoon, they placed a bathing pavilion. Decks reached out into the water, and bathhouses covered the whole area, and many people took advantage of it, and among them were the boys from San Francisco.
The problem is, meanwhile, not as many people took the railroad as were expected. And so Pacifica and San Mateo County was still on the coastside, a sleepy village, growing by at least 400 to 500 people a year. But it was still that small. The first gas station was next door to Anderson's store, which still stands today. That was built in 1907. And the castle, which was built in 1908, has still stood the test of time. But we'll go back to the 20s, and we find that in San Mateo County, there was one county road, the old county road. There were 2 or 3 stores. There was no school, so that the residents of this area were still transported to San Francisco or San Bruno in order to get their education. But few of them went to school. More of them were concerned about keeping farms and ranches together. Farming was primarily artichokes. Also in the 20s, a national incident, namely political, prohibition. Did prohibition stop people from drinking? Well, obviously, it was proven that that didn't happen. Did prohibition stop people from importing liquor? Not in the area that's known as Pacifica. In fact, we had the boats coming in with the liquor, In fact, people from San Francisco would often come to Pacifica because apparently the rules were sort of relaxed and not really enforced regarding prohibition. Also, a few speakeasies were created in the area, a few bordellos, and sure enough, the castle turned into one of those places. In 1927, the dollar radio was formed, which was a means of communication ship to shore, and of course the ships were owned by R. Stanley Dollar. And the steamship lines that went all over the world, their communication became known to come from what area is now Pacifica, what is now Palmetto Avenue. Move forward to the 40s and find that the war brought about two major changes to this area of Pacifica. The first was the use of the castle as an observing point.
The ships coming in, watching, you know. Submarines wouldn't come in if they come in, they're big battle wagons, but then they, you know, they had floating mines too, and they looked out for them, you know.
But the World War ending brought another phase of life to this area. Many of the people in the service for the United States had been stationed in and around the Bay Area, and some liked it enough that they thought maybe they would stay here and develop with their families. And in Pacifica, among other cities, or the area now known as Pacifica, the developers, and particularly Andrew Odstadt, decided that this would be an attraction for the servicemen who are now out, because the federal government had made available GI loans, which made it very practical for them to buy low-cost housing based on an advance from the government. So the developer seized on it. People came back to Pacifica, and particularly in the Lindemar section, they developed the homes. They then began building schools, and it became a community of a few thousand people rather than the few hundred. And so the 1950s, a few more families came in, and people saw the need to maybe get together as a total community. You had townships, Lindemar, Edgemar, Valimar. Some of them were built around what had been the railroad station from the Ocean Shore Railroad in the 1920s. But still, they were separate and maybe not even equal. They were clearly independent. They might go to one of the other towns for some goods, but family-wise and culturally and socially, they each had their own. The Little Brown Church, of course, still remained a center of this area.
Church was a meeting place for many things during the early days. There was no school in Pacific Manor, and so it fulfilled the functions of a meeting place such as a school furnishes us nowadays.
I remember the Well Baby Clinic also, which was offered to people in Sharp Park or in this community as a service to us. And so I took my son there for all his shots, and they operated very, very specially for the people in Sharp Park.
And then it itself, the church, later fell out of being an active church and had several other uses here in the community, including as a school, as a location for the police department. And in 1957, another active group hoping to consolidate.
We set up a committee and called them to a meeting at our home. So every night, Sunday night, for 9 months, we met at our home. And then for a couple of months, we had so many people, we finally had to find another place to meet.
What finally sprung them together, notwithstanding that there were two newspapers, each taking an opposite position of pro-incorporation or anti-incorporation, the members of the city voted 2,600 to 2,100 that it was now time to incorporate. When the city was formed, and they actually had to vote to include whatever name it was going to be, and there was a little competition about that. When it got on the ballot, the name of Pacifica was selected. But how did it become selected? The committee that was putting it on the ballot had a contest to decide what would be best. And the name chosen was Pacifica, partly because of the access to the Pacific Ocean, but incidentally, the great statue of Pacifica that adorned the International Exposition in San Francisco in the 1939-1940, which we often call the World's Fair, was held at Treasure Island. That word Pacifica and the statue and the symbol was adopted.
The statue is of Pacifica. It's what they call a replica, a copy of it, but it's only 1 foot tall. And the one it was copied from was 80 feet tall. But she represents the peacefulness of the people around the edge of the Pacific Ocean. And she has a kind of an oriental look, not quite any one group of people.
When the elections were held for city council in 1957, the winner was Jean Fassler, which is a remarkable feat for a woman to win the mayorship. But Jean Fassler led it through its initial stages of development. A few new organizations formed about that time. The Moose had a lodge here. Some of the civic organizations, the Lions was the first to have a lodge or a chapter here. You have the Rotarians moved here, the Junior Chamber of Commerce moved here. It became a city who was now willing to work with each other and share with each other. Another element of the history of Pacifica, although it only occurred on a few occasions, is that our beach seemed to welcome ships. 9 ships were shipwrecked here on the coast side with Pacifica. And the most famous of which, of course, was the recent one in 1966, when the destroyer escort USS Johnson beached near Maury Point, Sharp Park, the beach of Pacifica. One of the interesting impacts upon Pacifica was a change in the highway structure of Pacifica, and a change that in fact did not occur. Let's take the change that occurred. In the 60s, the roads through Pacifica nearing the coast were comfortable for people, but not necessarily the way it was going to be part of the U.S. highway system. The Highway 1 was going to go right through the center of what was the Sharp Park area and displace many existing homes and businesses. It may not have pleased the people in Pacifica, but they didn't have much choice of what was going to happen. But it did in fact change the place of Pacifica, both to bring more traffic into Pacifica and split what had long been a historic area of Sharp Park. The other was the battle over Highway 380, another U.S. highway. And that would have come from San Bruno and over the mountain and right into the heart of Pacifica. At the time that there was discussion, once again, people sort of anti the contact with San Bruno and preserving the beauty, pristine comfort of Pacifica, not wanting to have the more traffic that would flow into Pacifica, voted to not accept the Highway 380. Residents of Pacifica in 82 and 83 would of course recall the devastating storms, outgrowth of El Nino. They didn't just cause damage from the rain and the floods, but they destroyed homes, they caused landslides, and even a couple of children were innocently killed by the devastation brought about by the storms. Nothing like that ever since, and nothing before known, but the degree of the damage was such to cause people to consider or reconsider where they would build again.
I was inside. I had a friend. We're inside when a big wave came in, and we got out the front door here just in time. But it's eating away, and the chimney's about ready to go.
house has been standing here for 50, 60 years. It's been remodeled a few times.
Well, we've moved out some of our pets, and we have some valuables put aside, ready to go. Valuables being, like photographs and things like that. And we're ready. I figure, my husband and I both figure that if it happens, we'd rather be ready for it. It's pretty scary. We've only had the house about a year and a half. We're kind of hoping to live here a while.
What's happening is the ocean is permanently rearranging our coastline. Whether anybody likes to believe that or not.
The present pier was created in 1972. It has a unique attraction because people from San Francisco or Half Moon Bay could come here and fish without the fishing licenses normally required. It's the unusual part of Pacifica's concern for wilderness, the mountain trails, the trails along the beach.
To have a clean environment, it's just so uplifting and fulfilling, and something that we all need and we all really yearn for these days, more so than ever. And I think it's because we've lost a lot of that sense of connectedness, and this is one of the ways that gets us connected, gets us involved in taking care of the earth, and then we can really appreciate it more and know what it's really about deep in our souls. That's what it's all about when you come right down to it.
Probably the most well-known of all the recreational activities is surfing. Surfing has been a sport in Pacifica almost longer than any other place in the world. Now, the development of one of the most sophisticated skate parks in the world. I talked about the book, The Pacifica Images, and that was just one way to learn about the history of Pacifica. But another way, which was valuable to me as a newcomer, was to join the Pacifica Historical Society, not merely because of the quarterly programs that would have lectures about various topics or tours to various points or visits to other historical museums so that we could know more about the West Coast and the Pacific area. But there are benefits to work on certain projects of the Society. I, for one, have chosen to work on several of them, but one very popular one is the restoration of the Little Brown Church. You've heard us reference it earlier. It's a center of town, it is a center of history, and it was about to fall into disrepair and abandoned. And indeed now, the Historical Society has worked out an agreement by which it is now the possessor, although the city owns the land, but with the responsibility of restoring it. And so volunteer architects and volunteer painters and volunteer plumbers are all getting together, and a committee is formed to make decisions about what way it should be redeveloped into a form of a museum, a town center, a venue for weddings and parties and other events. And you can be involved in those decisions by joining the Little Brown Church Committee of the Historical Society. But if you're fascinated by the history of the railroad, the Ocean Shore Railroad, we were able to find, about 2 years ago, one remaining car number 1409, which was part of the original railroad that ran across the coastline, and it was located, the car, in Sebastopol. And so an event by the Historical Society was to bring that here and plant it here, so to speak, and restore it. And who's doing the restoration? Again, volunteers, people with an interest in engineering, people with an interest in railroads, painters, all the kind of people you would want to have associated through the Pacifica Historical Society. Another activity of the Society is this program. This program is operated from Pacifica's Community Access Station. And because of budget limitations, that station only puts on shows where people will provide their own crew. And so members of the Pacific Historical Society came to workshops to learn how to operate the cameras, to learn how to operate sound and video. You too can be part of that by joining the Pacific Historical Society. And perhaps our most fascinating project now is to look forward to the 50th anniversary celebration of the founding of Pacifica. You know that was November 22, 1957, and there will be a worldwide celebration. We will meet people from our sister city in Spain. We will meet people from all over the Bay Area who will recall how Pacifica has meant something to them. There's also the possibility that you can help us not only with membership, not only with volunteering, but an important thing that no other nonprofit seems to want, and that is memorabilia, books, diaries, journals, newspaper clippings that go back 50 years, 60 years. Before the corporation, there was still a Pacifica coast side, and that coast side has people who did activities here and recorded them in some manner. It's the kind of thing that you would want to see going either to your children if they appreciated history, or to the Pacifica Historical Society in case they didn't. Look around, gather up whatever there may be, and give it to us, show it to us, or lend it to us, so that we can help others learn more about the history and the creation of Pacifica and what it stands for. I see my time is about up, and so this one will close. But remember, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and, departing, leave behind us footprints in the sands of time.